Hi all, I have an absolutely fantastic, instructive attacking chess game to show you today. Alekhine against Emanuel Lasker. This is one of the featured games in that classic Art of Attack chess course, which you can now get at Kingscrusher TV/Art of Attack. Well worth checking out. So this game, Alekhine is a brilliant attacking player, but Lasker is also absolutely brilliant as well. They're both world chess champions. This was a clash they had in the Zurich tournament of 1934. So to set the context a little bit, 1927 was when Alekhine beat Capablanca to become world champion. So in this Zurich 1934, in fact, there was lurking the Max Ower, who was later to defeat Alekhine. So quite a fantastic tournament, Zurich 1934. A lot of elite European masters, and then world champion Alekhine. So we have d4. Lasker plays very classically. d5, we have a Queen's Gambit declined. So pretty standard position indeed. So e3, black castles, rook c1. A waiting move, waiting for d takes c4 perhaps, in the hope that the bishop can move in one go, but black plays c6, so waiting again for bishop d3 to pounce them with d takes c4. Bishop takes c4. Now this freeing maneuver, trying to offer the exchange of bishops. h6 has been seen before in a Fischer-Spassky game. That's not too bad. That ended in a draw in 1972. It's pretty solid for black after bishop h4. Black doesn't have to go crazy here. Black can play b5 and a6 and get a solid position. So anyway, knight d5. We have the dark square bishops coming off. And now one of Alekhine's pet moves, knight e4. He seems to really like this idea of knight g3. And from g3, you know, sometimes maybe it's got attacking potential, especially if it can go to that f5 square. But at the moment, you know, it's a longer term plan if the e-pawn ever moves. And they say knife f5. It's a Ben Feingoldism if the knight's going to f5. It seems Alekhine was after a knife f5. Not a knight f5, a knife f5. So anyway, back in the 1927 match, by the way, as part of research for this game, I did check out the 7 game encounters with this knight e4. And you know what? They were all drawn. And there's a reason why they were all drawn. Well, statistically, after knight f6, knight g3, they were all drawn in that match because Capablanca kept playing queen b4 check. And I even asked back in 2011, actually on ChessGames.com, why did these guys play these 7 ultra boring games? And I think it's because there's a secret code given by FIDE that some of the World Championship games must uphold the top level of solidness and boringness possible, because this also occurred in a Kasparov match of endless Queen's Gambit declines. It's just a tradition, it seems. But this position, after the queens come off, I searched to answer the question again. I just revised all 7 games as preparation for this game. And actually there were 2 or 3 that were quite exciting. There was one which was actually pretty exciting with an exchange sack, but they all ended in draws. And I'm sure Lasker was aware of this fact. He could have played queen b4. He could have taken the queens off. Here's an example of a 28 move draw from the match. So one of the 7 examples where black just seemed to equalise. You know, the queen's coming off. Okay, white can play for e5, but it's always going to be a downside. And white didn't anyway, didn't bother with that. And they just exchanged off a few pieces and agreed a draw here. And in fact, in one of these draw examples, Capablanca actually fell asleep. So it's quite fascinating if you want to check out the 1927 match, to check out these examples. But I did actually make a note for you guys. So round 16, you know, draw in 24 moves, very dull. And in fact, the world chess champion, who was Capablanca, showed his disdain for Alekhine by going to sleep during the 16th move of their match. Yeah, so he had to kind of be woken up. So anyway, that's the background of knight e4. It's for some reason one of Alekhine's favourite moves, and he doesn't really care that it's got a pretty low success rate. He just plays it anyway, knowing that there's this line where black can simplify. So let's just go back. He knows, fully aware that black has a simplification idea after the pesky knight reaches g3 to play queen b4. I find a relevant quotation today about this. Well, maybe relevant. In my opinion, the master is morally obliged to seize every opportunity to try and solve the problems of the position without fear of some simplifications. Maybe he really didn't mind the queens coming off. But I do find that a bit strange for an attacking player. The queen is like the most attacking piece. There are several Mikhail Tal game examples where queens literally dance for ages because Tal doesn't want the queens to come off. So I don't know. But also perhaps a bigger reason, in the 1927 match, it was the first to 6 wins. So maybe Alexander Alekhine really didn't care. The draws didn't count. It would just go on and on and on. In fact, like a Karpov-Kasparov match, where we also had seemingly endless Queen's Gambit decline draws. So anyway, it's a tradition. For some reason in this game, Lasker takes a risk with e5. It's a sort of risk it's got up and down sides actually, which are quite subtle. Downsides, the bishop's kind of liberated. The knight's got this f5. It's like giving the dream of f5 to this knight. Black could have, if black didn't want the queen exchange line, black could have considered c5. However, it's not entirely that clear cut as you might think, because white might later go for e4 like this and play for e5. It's a little bit scary, these kind of positions where white might get an edge. So perhaps Lasker, he didn't really want that kind of plan where white might try and creep in e5 later. So he plays this e5 plan. It seems overall a little bit controversial given the knight's placement on g3, as if 2 pieces basically have been liberated. And a knight on f5 is sometimes called knife f5, which was popularized by Ben Feingold, US Grandmaster Ben Feingold. So white castled here, and perhaps Alekhine's pretty happy actually. I suspect that Lasker might have thought that the knight on f5 is a sort of tactical liability, and there's no way that after e takes d4, perhaps he did expect e takes d4 with white trying to use maybe the c5 and e5 outposts. But after knight f5 gaining a tempo, so not automatically recapturing, Alekhine actually maybe gives a surprise. He actually plays knight 3 takes d4. This is really the way to play for an advantage here. Keep this dangerous looking knight. And he's looking at g7. g7 is one of my favourite squares for checkmating recently, by the way. I have literally every single time I play speed chess, bullet chess in particular, I kind of mate in a tournament on g7 with regularity. In fact, my very first move, b3, bishop b2, is targeting g7. And I try later, after f4 later, queen e1 to g3, and I'm frequently mating on g7. It is a fantastic focal point. And in fact, the art of attack has quite a few examples of the g7 focal point in particular. So that's fascinating stuff as well to me about this game. But we have knight e5. If white had played e takes d4, perhaps black can set up a blockade like this. And it looks to be, kick the knight and just set up a blockade. There should be nothing for black to really worry about here. That isolated pawn can become pretty miserable, and black's actually doing quite well there, it seems. But this challenges the whole concept completely now. The knight is going to be staying there for a bit, or is it? Black played knight e5, bishop b3. Now black did take off on f5, so there's a bishop without a counterpart now, which could be quite dangerous. And here, perhaps this is the blunder of the game. Black could either maybe take the queens off again, there's an open invitation, or just, kick this knight away, resolve this painful issue, this knife, just get it away from the king. For some reason, he didn't do this. I mean, g6, okay, knight d6, okay, queen e7 protects b7, and this should be fine. This should be fine, it should be even. If we look at queen takes d1, another opportunity to simplify. Maybe again, it's not entirely a big deal, but actually, yeah, it is slightly a big deal because after knight d6, it's kind of an annoying position for black actually. Black's on the back foot here. White has central pawn mobility and should have a significant advantage there. So out of the lesser evils, I believe g6 is the way to play. But for whatever reason, Lasker had an idea that queen b6 was handy. Perhaps he completely underestimated there's a certain weakness in the last move. The queen is kind of neglecting the squares by queen b6. The weakness of the last move is neglecting key squares, and in particular this one. And you might wonder why that one in particular. The thing is, if we look at my favourite plan with b3 nowadays in bullet, I want to get a queen to g7. Can you see how white could try and get a queen attacking g7 here? I've kind of given it away, but there is a kind of bouncing manoeuvre, d6 to g3, and en route it's attacking a loose piece anyway. Then we get a coordination on g7. This is the very move Alekhine plays, and black is in severe trouble. Perhaps if Lasker had considered this move in particular and this bouncing manoeuvre, he would never have played queen b6. It seems white is getting a dangerous attacking initiative to throw punches now at the black king and have piece cooperation against g7, a very sensitive square indeed. We have knight ed7. The thing is also here, there's a tactic to make note of. If knight g6, guess what white plays in this position, which is extremely annoying indeed. If I give you 10 seconds to pause the video, white play here. Okay, the queen is also exerting an influence on f6, and we have knight h6. It's pretty annoying. If black doesn't want to incur structural damage, you know, this is just structurally so much nicer for white. It's a winning position basically, but otherwise, you know, there's knight takes f7, even worse, carnage and destruction, and it's going to be end of game soon after that, you know, the rook switching. So yeah, knight g6 is largely unplayable because of knight h6 check. So we have this very unfortunate situation of knight ed7, and in fact white doesn't even play queen g3 immediately. There's rook fd1, rook ad8, and now queen g3. The engines also suggest, by the way, queen f4 might be a viable alternative. Queen f4 is also quite interesting, you know, keeping some pressure potentially on the f file as well as the possibility of queen g5. For example, here, this is pretty annoying. This is pretty strong stuff. But what is black doing here? Black's in real trouble after queen f4 as well. This is just a menacing position. If h6 waiting for another weakness, then the queen could use this and then carnage and destruction like this. For example, here it's all favouring white the tactics. So anyway, so queen f4 is also a decent move in the position, but queen g3 was played, threatening mate in 1. So black plays g6 now, and we have queen g5. And it's very difficult for black to resolve the issues here. You might think there's a very tempting pin in this position with queen b5, right? To pin that knight to the queen. If queen b5, in fact, there's quite an exotic tactical idea here. Can you guess? If I give you 10 seconds to pause here, white play in this position. Pretty exotic idea exists. Because they say pin and win, don't they? Or is it pin and lose here? It might be pin and lose, because this could be a tactical liability after bishop takes f7. Because if king takes, then there's knight d6, forking queen and king. And if rook takes f7, there's a nasty a nasty relative pin here, which white exploits after check. Knight takes f7, so that protects the queen. And here, white's left with that fantastic relative pin, and this position is just massively advantageous to white. It's a very, very big position indeed for white here. And if we look at this again, instead of queen b5, let's have a look at another alternative, knight e4. it's mostly pointless. Queen e7. For example, rook d e8, bishop takes f7 is crushing. And here it's even worse, it's just devastation. A5 to see what's going on, what is white threatening, maybe a rook left. And then rook f4, putting pressure, holding the knight, putting pressure on the f-file. And things like this, it's carnage and devastation. The queen's also eyeing d8 here, so this kind of thing, as well as king takes knight d6, forking queen and king. The d8 rook is going to be dropping off sometimes, or even worse, after taking on d8. So a very, very difficult position now has emerged. We have king h8, and the knight goes to d6, getting the king to have to go back to protect f7. And now this pawn has got mobility. This is a real big problem in this position after e4. So there's a big idea potentially of e5, but also you can see that this third rank has been cleared. Both these rooks can now operate on this third rank to help the queen and knight with the attack. There's a real attacking campaign here underway. Knight g8 is not a very nice move to play, but what else is there to play? If a5, e5 will push that knight away anyway to somewhere horrible. It just starts to look really kind of horrendous. So knight g8, and we do have a rook left, rook d3. Rook c3 also does the job as well. But this is dual purpose. Perhaps white wants to double on the d-file. But this rook h3 as well, very, very dangerous stuff. We have now a very, very tricky position indeed. There's not too many escape squares, what I call escape squares for the black king right now. Because there's also two pieces having the king in, as well as these two pawns. Yeah, the king's lacking a little bit in air. Black played a weakening looking move, f6, liberating this bishop even more. It's pretty desperate stuff. If knight d-f6, for example this position, it's really quite hopeless here after just doubling the rooks. If h6, for example queen f4, this position, white's going to just have such a bind on the position. Even g4 is winning. For example here, after knight c4, that's winning material because of the doubling on d8 and the tempo gain. So there's horrible things that can emerge if black doesn't try and get out of this kind of vice grip in this position. So f6 was played. But now, knight f5 check, king h8, and perhaps Lasker had been banking on a simple queen retreat. Perhaps he'd been banking on queen h4, for example, and then maybe g5, and the game would carry on a bit. But here, white play, guess what Alexander Alekhine played? He played actually a knockout blow, basically, to the black king. So I'll give you 10 seconds for 200 points. White play here. What would you play in this position? And I've already given you a clue. It's not queen h4. So rule that one out. Okay. Sometimes you just take out one of these key pawns and the results are devastating. And here, yeah, it's devastating after queen takes g6, believe it or not, was played. Outrageous looking, but very logical. It threatens queen g7 mate. How can black actually defend g7? Black can't really. He can give up the rook, but then he's still threatening mate. So he has to really take this. And the point is, rook h3, there's not too many escape squares around the king at all because of that knight's covering g7. This knight's kind of helping self-mate the king here. And if the knight wasn't there, the bishop's holding g8. So these guys are holding the two key escape squares anyway. It's mating. Yeah, it's absolutely mating. The game actually ended, by the way, after this. Lasker resigned, he saw this. So this is just if it continued. H takes, rook h6, sorry, rook h3, knight h6, and rook takes h6 would be checkmate. So what philosophical points do we get from this game? Well, I got quite a few, and some of them just relate to psychology and other stuff, actually. I'm wondering, Alekhine really wanted to make a name for himself with this knight e4 variation. Allowing the queen exchange, surely, surely it's not such a good idea. Black can basically equalise. But aside from that, it seems as though Lasker in this game liberated the white pieces. He took a risk, perhaps for some very solid reasons he had, but it turned out the knight was a monster later. It was kind of reinforced by the other knight. It was a monster. He never got rid of the knight. He had a moment to kick it away, and he should have been able to equalise. The queen b6 kind of created a weakness of the last move on d6, which was a pivot square to bounce to g3, or f4 as well, to get to that sensitive g7 square. So the g7 focal point is actually a major killer focal point. I think any mastery of the defaultness of black castling kingside, which is the most common thing that black's going to do against you when you play, like this diagonal of death, or the g7 pawn, or removing the h pawn. If you have a lot of reserve ideas relating to these pawns and the diagonals and the files, I think it's going to make you a better attacking player. The coordination point g7 is a very, very juicy coordination point indeed. It was permitted on this occasion. Black seems to, I think, principally missed queen d6, this bouncing maneuver, queen d6. After that, black was really on the back foot. The tournament standings, for those interested in the Zurich tournament, Alekhine won the tournament. He only had one defeat to Max Euwe, who later was going to beat him, but he was going to get his revenge after, when he was less drunk. So yes, he actually won the tournament with 13 out of 15. That's quite a crush. 12 wins, only one loss to Max Euwe, and 2 draws. Max Euwe chasing him, 12 out of 15, 10 wins, only one loss, 4 draws. Then we had Simon Floor, and we had we had Bogle, as I know some of you called him Bogle, and we had Lasker at 10 out of 15. Not too bad, he still won 9 games, lost 4. This was one of them. Drew 2. Nimzowitsch 9 out of 15. So anyway, fantastic tournament, Zurich 1934. This is a very interesting game, but I think a bit blunderful. Some inaccuracies, missing some key points. Lasker here with the black pieces to equalise, and he had several opportunities to equalise, especially with this knight e4 pet opening of Alexander Alekhine, which I'm sure Lasker would have known. There were 7 draws in the World Championship with queen b4. Okay, if you want to study this and other instructive attacking games, there's that course at Kingscrusher TV/Art of Attack. Grandmaster Simon Williams, aka Ginger GM, goes over this and many other games and gets a huge number of very fantastic reusable points for your own attacking chess to sharpen your attacking skills. Well worth checking out. Comments, questions, likes, subscribes, all appreciated. Thanks very much.
Every battle is won by preparation. We've taken one of the most popular chess books ever written and rewired it for the modern player. The Art of Attack. Learn with Chessable's state-of-the-art move trainer technology, presented by myself, Grandmaster Simon Williams. I'll talk you through 29 hours worth of educational video content, from attacking the uncastled king, bishop sacrifices, diagonal attacks, and classic pawn storms. Paint your opponent's king into a corner with the Art of Attack.